to Premier number 33. And tonight we're returning back to the internal map of reality information. We had 2 sessions prior to this, looking at more health-related things, which I think is very, very important, your physical health. And I have a few more topics in that related area, but tonight we're going to zoom back in to what I think is the key component of understanding your internal map of reality. The general overall topic is, how does your internal timeline work? And we'll be following the previous format. You have this little introduction now with the discussion, and then we'll do our 1-minute meditation, which is again a practice, the practicing of doing longer, more private meditations. And the length of your quiet setting meditation can go from anywhere from 1 minute or even less, even just a few seconds of setting quietly and getting your composure, to what I prefer. I prefer to set for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, even longer if I have the time. And something happens after about 5 or 10 minutes of just sitting quietly, looking at your fuzzy dot or a spot on the wall, just something to keep your focus, is that things soften, things get very gentle. And as your brainwave frequencies begin to slow down, you begin to perceive more, and you become part of the whole. It's a wonderful experience. So we'll do a 1-minute meditation, and follow that. We're going to go along with session 5 of the internal map reality, and I drill in pretty deep into what are the key filters that you use to construct your timeline. Remember now, we have these internalized filters that remove a lot of what you are perceiving. So you only focus in on specific things that you yourself have determined are important. So we'll look at those key filters, and then I'll go into great detail about how the timeline meditation to cleanse your timeline works. And then next week, we'll focus just on doing the meditation itself. But tonight it's, what is the timeline? How does it work? And then specifically, how do we cleanse the timeline? So for me, this is the key. If you can understand that you have a timeline, you can understand the nature of it. You can look at some of the work that Bradshaw did on the inner child to understand the significance of working with your timeline. Okay, so let's just relax, sit quietly with your eyes open or your eyes closed, and we'll do the 1-minute meditation now. From the last session, and we'll be going deeper into our filters. Now, the timeline is expansive. And as we indicated, here, one example being that depending on how you view, how you're oriented to your timeline, that may affect whether you perceive things or whether you judge things. So your exercise was, in fact, to identify how you see if it matched up. In fact, true. It may not be true for everyone. So this would be an interesting little experiment that we can do, and you can then do it for others. So what we found out with the direction finder is that the way you are processing the information on your timeline may, in fact, have other implications for the way you process information in general. The way I like to think of it is that if I am very associated with my timeline and I feel that it's running through me, that I am physically facing my future, it's directly in front of me, and my past is directly behind me. And in a sense, I am perceiving or feeling I'm more intact, in touch with my timeline. I become more sensitive, more of a perceiver, as opposed to someone who is looking at the timeline as something laid out in front of them like a display in a cabinet with the past, the present, and the future all visible in front of them, disassociated, so you can be easier to judge. But there are other interesting filters or ways the timeline can filter our day-to-day reality. And we're just going to review a few of them here. The frequency counter. Many different approaches to the frequency counter. The thing is that the three big ones is if something has never happened before, so a frequency of 0. If something has happened only once, frequency counter of 1. Or something has happened before or many times. So you may find that people who procrastinate will use the frequency counter and saying, oh, they've never done that before, so I don't want to do that again, a way of procrastinating. Or the person may say, oh, no, I've done that once before, I don't want to do that again. Or the procrastinator might say, oh, I've done that too many times, we do it every time, I don't want to do that anymore. The reverse of that is true as well. That someone may say, oh, I've never done that before, I would love to do that. Or I've done it once, that means I can do it again, I would like to repeat it. Or it's happened many, many times, I can do this, it's like water falling off a duck's back, love to do it again, no problem, let's do it. So there's no right or wrong or good or bad way of processing the never happened once, or happened before, but it's something to be aware of. Why? Because people who have compulsive behaviors may be triggered by one of those three levels. Let me give you an example. People who are heavily triggered by the frequency counter of 0 may become very, very evasive and very nervous when being asked to do something that they've never done. So this frequency counter is just something to be observed of, because it tends to radiate, just like with the direction filter, all right? The way you view the never happened once, or happened frequently, can affect the way you deal with larger aspects of your life. Now, I always use the example of asking someone for something simple, like if you're sitting down for dinner, you ask them, could you please pass the pepper? And notice that some people will do it right away. Some people will take asking them twice, other people 3 times. So this frequency counter is very important. Then you can then look at whether or not this is true for bigger things in their life. Now, if we get to situations where people need to overcome a major, major limitation, something that's very, very unresourceful, and you want either you or someone you love to be able to conquer a fear or conquer some aspect of their personality that's really, really limiting them. This is where this frequency counter comes in. For some people, you only need to do something once and then they're okay. I think of my friend who had the fear of heights, and all she needed to do was to take the process, which we'll be talking about later on, the way of cleansing your root cause event. Once that root cause event was cleansed, she only needed to go up in that high-rise building in Las Vegas and do the bungee cord jump off the building. Once she did that, she was good to go. She never again looked back and had the fear of heights. Other people, you have to do things frequently, right? And if you are someone who will never do something, there'll never be that right time, as in the quote from Napoleon Hill, there will never be that right time for you to do something. Don't wait for that right time. So knowing where you fit in this range of frequency counters can have major implications in other things in your life. Pay attention to whether you avoid things that you've never done before, avoid things that you've only done once, or avoid things that you do frequently. Having the flexibility to react to all of those is important. You need to be able to do things that you've never done before. This is the discovery thing. So if you have this frequency counter issue where you avoid things that you've never done before, this can have a huge impact on your ability to grow and change, because there are many, many things that we've never done before. So that opens up the world of possibilities. So we'll be talking again about the frequency counter filter in your timeline and looking at other ways that it can be both used in a positive way and how you can deal with compulsive issues in your life. The other way the timeline can play, and it's kind of related to the frequency counter, is what does it take to convince someone? What number of times do you have to do to convince someone? Or do you have to use a different number of modes? Do you have to say something to them verbally? Do you have to describe it as a picture, as an image, visually? Do you have to give them a tactile feeling to be able to do something? Some people need to be able to either physically touch something or have the image of actually physically manipulating something before they are convinced to do something. Other people require an interval, so they will be faced with having to maybe make a change or do something, but then they need a period of time, a set period of time between their first recognizing that they need to do something and the second request. So how many times do they have to be approached on something? How many different modes and what modes do they need to hear it in? And is there an interval, a specific interval? Is it a minute later, an hour later, a day later, a week later? When I was involved in doing large end scale computer sales, it was quite often that the salesperson would ask for the order a number of different ways. Not just say, well, would you like to purchase this computer? They would then have to rephrase it as, do you think that your organization could use this computer? And then you could rephrase it as, do you think your budget will be able to support the purchase of this computer? And then the interval, you might want to think, well, tell you what, let's leave it like this for now, and I'll come back and we'll arrange another meeting. What would be a good time for you? And they'll tell you, oh, well, come by tomorrow or come by next week, or, oh, we'll have to be at the next budget turn, in 3 months or whatever. And then notice that the person will tell you what mode they want to hear the next convincer statement in. So if you did a thing with using the mode of visual, and you said, can you see your organization purchasing this equipment? And the person will say, well, I don't have a good feeling that they would want to purchase it now. Then you can come back and you say, well, what things do you think we can do to give them a better appreciation of how it would actually work in their organization? So you can come back and say, well, what can you physically do? What can we, how can we manipulate the situation such that your decision-making team can feel good about purchasing? So you'll actually get clues in the language. I often believe that when people speak, they will speak in terms of the verbs that relate to their primary mode of thinking. So the convincer is very important, not only for getting others to do things, but in terms of convincing yourself that something is right. Pay attention for how you come at being convinced of something. Now, there is a reality that there are people who just cannot be convinced of stuff. As soon as they feel that they are being talked to in a way to try to get them to change their mind, they will not. Once they made up their mind, that's it. And there are others that are more easier to convince. The key here is with the convincer is that if you look at something simple that requires to convince you or someone, it's also applicable for the more complex things in their lives or in their situations. For some people, it's very difficult to reverse a decision. So if you're trying to get someone to reverse their conclusion, it may be a battle that you're not going to win. You might be better off to construct a whole different scenario where you don't directly challenge their belief. And then finally, there's an unexplained component here. If you ask someone, why did you make that decision? They may be able to tell you, and then they may shrug their shoulders and say something like, oh, I don't know, I just didn't feel like I wanted to do whatever it was. The unexplained shrugging shoulders, oh, I just don't know, or a gut feeling or something like that. This tells you right away that there's a big subconscious component here. It also tells you that this person, including yourself, may be easily manipulated if you are unaware of what things influence you to make decisions. If you don't know, then that means that there's variables or aspects out there that you're not aware of, that you can't really see. They're filtered out of your filtered reality that can affect you, that can affect how you make decisions. So know why you are convinced to do something, and if you don't, you may want to do some meditation. Think about what it is that made you decide to do something or not to do something. In other words, understand what things motivate you. Now, we'll be getting into this later on when we do strategies for motivation. And this is an example, sort of precursor, giving an idea that it has to do with modes of thinking. Something now that I see a lot, in myself and with other people, that as you age, as you move along your personal timeline, you have set goals, or you have set keystone or markers along your timeline to indicate when you can and cannot do things. There's sort of limiters, brackets. Now, very resourceful, flexible people have a very broad bracket, and they can do things that they could do when they were a child, and they can do things that they can consider are more for a senior or an adult. You have access to the full range of your abilities. Other people are very restricted and are very centered on their age. And this can be related to where they are in the pecking order of their family. Are they the firstborn, the second, or the oldest? Oh, so the youngest. So firstborn and lastborn tend to have completely different perceptions. The firstborn tends to see that they can do anything, whereas those who were born later on, maybe the lastborn of a larger family, felt the restrictions of being the youngest and always being told by someone older. So your family order has an impact on this particular filter, your timeline filter. And the big one here is the root cause event. Your root cause, your events from the past tend up being major limiters in terms of your present and future behaviors. People, when they're making a decision about what they're going to do today or in the future, will inevitably look back to events in their past that can give them an idea whether or not they're able to do this. It sets their expectations. So one aspect of the limiter filter of your timeline I find interesting is that some people will see themselves as givers and others will see themselves as receivers. Others will see themselves as victims, and others will see themselves as rescuers. This has a lot to do with how you perceive your timeline in terms of your abilities. If you are looking ahead in your limiter timeline where you feel the older you are, you have power or control over people who are younger and people who are older. We're going to delve deeper into the limitations that we assign on ourselves with this aspect of their timeline. And we'd like to remove it, wouldn't we? And one way we will be removing it is by neutralizing root cause events. And that will be the major part of our next session. Okay, so the final filter that I like to just talk about briefly is what I call the social binder. What things in your social context are limiting you? And these, again, are stored on your timeline. Things about your social interactions stored in your past will determine what you do in the present and what you will do in the future. Now, one way that you can control the social binder is through power frames. So you can implement, if you can identify that there is some limitation, if you want to be able to do something in your life, and you find that it's difficult or you're being limited, and you can just look back and you can see that it's because of your family upbringing or because of your friends, what they call the social controls of your friendships, or if it's something to deal with your employment, past or the present, they can create binders, things that will be limiting you. Now, we've talked about power frames in the past, so what you can do is you can construct power frames to help neutralize any social bindings. I'm just sort of working now to come up with an example of that. I had an opportunity to run my Introduction to Meditation course, and it was only available for employees in this particular university. So employees could take the course for free, but students couldn't. And I had one student approach me and say that she would really like to take the course, but then she realized that it was for employees only. Her reaction was, when she found out that it was for employees only, was to just accept it and go away. My reaction to her was, oh, well, we can find a way around that. And I just simply made her an apprentice, and she came in as a student apprentice, helping me with the course. And basically all she had to do was just, give me feedback and participate in the course as an observer. But there's always a way around the rules and regulations from your employment, from your friends, and from your family that set up these rules and regulations that affect your future and affect your present. Power frames, or just looking at it in a resourceful way, can allow you to get around these social binders. Nothing is written. The importance of the timeline has been discussed over the number of different sessions we've had. And we're about to wrap up the timeline and all of the timeline filters and all that with this exercise. Now, the way I'm going to break it up is that initially what I will do is go through the process of cleaning the timeline, and then I will issue a separate little video with the actual guided meditation in it. So in this video, you'll learn what the cleanse process is about and how it's done. And then the Patreon, if you're a Patreon member, you will receive the actual video meditation separately. Okay, so let's get into it. So we already talked about the fact that we maintain in our subconscious a timeline. And normally we don't pay attention to this timeline, but we can refer to it. Now, the thing here is that we'll be talking about a root cause event that after this event, you were transformed, you were changed, significantly. So there's some event that afterwards you became emotionally charged such that you behaved differently. So it affected your mental state and it affected your behavior. Now, these events are typically suppressed because we don't like to remember negative things, or we put dressing on it, we put chocolate cake around them and whatever. But they go into our subconscious, and we are mostly unaware, unconscious of these root cause events. But we can get to them. The most important thing is that if we can go to that root cause event and neutralize it, then that will free you in the present time. And these root cause events tend to be very difficult to resolve. Why? Because they get suppressed and they are mainly held in your unconscious area of your greater self. So, what do you do to cleanse your timeline? Well, first you've got to find that initial event. Then, once you've found the initial event, you can then move to a point in time before that event happened. And guess what? Prior to that root cause event ever happening, you were just fine. Everything about you in regards to this event had not happened, and therefore you were in good shape. So basically what the cleansing process is to identify the event. And by identify the event, I don't mean relive it. I just mean just be aware of roughly when the event happened, roughly what it's about, but more importantly, identifying what effect it has for you in the current time frame. What's limiting you and what is that connected to? And that's the tricky part that we need to trust our subconscious about. Because our subconscious can take us to that initial event and can allow us to then experience what it was like before the event. Once we have reestablished our normal state prior to this event, we can then release any emotions associated with it. And there's a number of ways we can do this, but we will at all times during the meditation stay disassociated. So you will not even react to the emotional content because you'll be removed from it. You'll be dissociated from it. You'll be distant, moved away from it. And then with a power frame, this is a special kind of power frame. It's an action power frame, an action that you do to release the emotions. The thing is that, and I mentioned this before, is that you will have to practice this cleanse sufficient number of times to completely clean your timeline. What I found personally was that the first time I did the cleanse, some of the content was released, and I felt about 20% better, but there was still that 80% left. And then each time I ran the timeline for myself, that percentage dropped, and there was less and less until you get to a point where there's maybe only 60 or 50% of the emotion remain in terms of the amount of charge in it. And then you release that. And then at some point, you've reduced the stress or the sensitivity of that to the point where you can look at it, you can and examine it without any emotional reaction. You have released it and you are freed. So for some people, this can happen quickly, and for others, it may take time. We did a research project at St. Mary's with this, and what we found was that the people who practiced more and had more awareness of the meditation component had better success with this. So this, with conjunction with your other meditative work, has many, many benefits. So the timeline meditation, well, it's a guided meditation, and there's some basic steps. We will first find out what direction, and use our direction finder, what direction our past is. And that's so that we can travel there. So we need to know what direction. Is it in front of us? Is it above us? If it's behind us, where is the past? Is it to our left? And we will disassociate ourselves from our timeline and travel back to a point in your timeline where this root cause event occurred. We won't relive it. We won't even go down it. We'll be way disassociated from it. You're looking at it from a distance, and there's no way any emotional charge can affect you. And we have a little technique to capturing some of the information that's in that root cause event. And that's a little bit of a magical trick that, since you are in charge, you can do. So we gather some information, and then we go to prior to the root cause event. And we allow ourselves to become associated with that, to immerse ourselves in what it feels like prior to that event ever happening. And holding on to that feeling, we then move forward onto our timeline, back above that root cause event, and then we can release the limiting emotions and relive the original normal state that we had prior to. And then we can move forward along our timeline, cleansing it as we go. So the key to make this meditation work is that you really do have to trust your subconscious, and you don't need to know everything. When we ask for your subconscious to take you to where this root cause event is, just trust that it does. Now, you may not know, you may not see or hear or smell anything. You may just know that your root cause event has been identified and found by your subconscious. You don't need to know the details consciously in order for this to work. So the key is to trust your subconscious and to repeat it frequently. So this resolution, we to go through the steps again, we identify the time frame, we locate it, and get enough information from that root cause event to be able to know that it is the right one. And then we go to a time prior to that event and realize that we don't have any of this emotional restrictions or limitations. And we restore that prior state along your timeline, and we release any of the emotions that were originally associated with that root cause event. Now, we can choose to retain some knowledge. Now, in every experience, there's some knowledge and there's some experience or emotion. So you may keep pertinent or valuable knowledge and store that someplace that's of value. And so this meditation only takes a few minutes. And once you listen to the tape and repeat it a few times, you should be able to conduct the meditation on your own. And that's what I found, is that after I listened to the tape a few times, I had enough information about how to do the meditation that I could do it. Whenever I felt that limitation, I would activate almost like a power frame, right? I'd activate this timeline cleanse, and I would immediately go back, and if there was any of that emotion left, I'd let it go. And remember, it probably won't, it might, but it probably won't all leave at once. It can take some time. Okay, so that is the introduction to the meditation. And as I say, the Patreon, you'll receive a separate video guiding you through the actual meditation. So enjoy, and see you in the next session.